I never really liked Thanksgiving. Something about being squeezed around a table with people who pretend to like each other one day a year just doesn't sit right with me. Maybe it's the forced smiles, or the way everyone's suddenly interested in your life just to compare it to theirs. For me, it's always been a reminder of where I stand in the family pecking order, somewhere between the broken ceiling fan in Grandma's attic and the cousin no one remembers until they need help moving. But this year was different. This year, my girlfriend came with me. My name's Tyler. I'm 29. I work in tech, back-end systems mostly, nothing flashy, but it pays well. I'm not flashy either, so it suits me. I live a few cities over in a modest apartment that I own outright. No roommates, no debt. I've done well for myself, just not in a way that gets you Instagram clout or makes Aunt Susan clutch her pearls in excitement. My family doesn't really get what I do. To them, if you're not posting it, boasting it, or wearing it on your wrist, it doesn't count. They're old school like that. Growing up, I was the quiet kid, the one who tinkered with computers while the other cousins played football in the yard. I wasn't a loner, but I definitely didn't fit the mold. My parents divorced when I was 13, and after that, I faded even further into the background. My dad's side, where all the drama lives, would still invite me to every holiday gathering, but I always felt like a courtesy guest, like someone who was just barely on the list. There's one person who's always made that painfully clear: my cousin Chelsea. She's 31, smug, and has never had to lift a finger in her life. Her dad, my Uncle Mark, is an executive VP at some manufacturing company. Chelsea works in marketing, which, as far as I can tell, means she posts motivational quotes on her company's Instagram and somehow collects a salary for it. She lives in a McMansion her parents paid for, drives a BMW she can't pronounce, and posts daily photos of her oat milk lattes with captions like, "Grind, don't stop." She's always had a way of putting people down with a smile. The kind of person who will compliment your outfit just to say she couldn't pull it off because she has hips. Anyway, this year I decided to bring my girlfriend, Lila. We've been dating for almost a year, and she's the kind of person who makes you feel grounded just by standing next to you. Lila's sharp. She works in corporate law, but she has this calm warmth that makes even my anxious mess of a brain feel steady. I warned her about my family, gave her the rundown on who's who to avoid, and what not to bring up. She just smiled, held my hand, and said, "Sounds fun. Let's go make some memories." The moment we walked into my aunt and uncle's house, I could feel the shift in energy. You know when people look at you just a little too long? Like they're scanning for flaws they can politely ignore? That's how Aunt Sharon looked at Lila. "Well, aren't you lovely?" she said, forcing a smile. "Tyler's finally dating up." Lila just laughed it off, but I felt my face heat up. It was subtle, like most of the jabs they throw. Not enough to cause a scene, just enough to remind you of your place. Dinner was served around 6. The table was massive, decked out in more autumn decor than a Michael's store during clearance week. Candles, gold-rimmed plates, little place cards with everyone's name written in cursive. They'd put me at the far end of the table, between my great-uncle who still calls the internet the devil's wires, and the family friend no one really likes but keeps inviting for reasons unknown. Lila was beside me, thankfully, giving my hand a quick squeeze when she saw me scanning the room with that old familiar dread. Dinner started off okay. The usual small talk, clinking of glasses, passing of dishes. Then came the toasts. Uncle Mark stood up first, saying how thankful he was for family and strong traditions. Aunt Sharon followed with something about gratitude and cherishing the old while welcoming the new. Then Chelsea stood up. I could already feel it brewing. She raised her wine glass like she was about to make a TED Talk go viral. "I just want to say," she began, all sugar and fake humility, "how proud I am of everyone at this table. We've all done so well this year. Promotions, new houses, weddings, actual life achievements." There was scattered laughter and polite nods. I felt a weird twinge in my chest but tried to ignore it. Then she looked directly at me, her eyes twinkling like she'd rehearsed this in the mirror. "Well, everyone except Tyler, obviously." She giggled, taking a sip from her glass. "But hey, maybe next year." The table erupted in laughter. Even Uncle Mark let out a snort. I sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh along or crawl under the table. My stomach sank like a stone. Lila didn't laugh. She hadn't even cracked a smile. She looked around the table, slowly, eyes calm but laser-focused. Then, Just as the laughter began to fade, she stood up. She smoothed her dress, lifted her glass, and said in the most polite, composed voice I've ever heard, "Funny, because he's the reason your father still has a job." Silence. Dead silence. The kind of silence where even the wine stops pouring itself. Chelsea blinked, the smile fading from her lips like someone had pulled a plug. Uncle Mark's fork clinked against his plate. Aunt Sharon's mouth was slightly open, like she was about to speak, but forgot how. I sat there stunned, heart hammering in my chest. I had no idea what Lila was talking about. I'd never mentioned anything like that to her. But I could see in her face, she wasn't bluffing. That was the moment everything began to unravel. And it was just the beginning. For a full 3 seconds, nobody said a word. It was like the entire house hit pause. The laughter drained out of the room, and in its place was this low, crawling discomfort. People shifted in their chairs, looked at each other, unsure whether they were supposed to pretend it was a joke or act like they hadn't heard it. Lila sat back down, calm as ever, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a napkin like she'd just commented on the weather. Uncle Mark cleared his throat first, one of those performative ahem noises that usually means someone's about to change the subject without acknowledging the elephant sitting at the table. "Well," he said, chuckling nervously, "that was something." Then he picked up the serving spoon and reached for the mashed potatoes like the entire moment hadn't just happened. A few others murmured in agreement, awkwardly returning to their food. But Chelsea? She wasn't done. Her smile had vanished, but that smug energy hadn't. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, tilting her head toward Lila like she was trying to trap her in a game of chicken. "What exactly did you mean by he's the reason my father still has a job?" Lila turned to her slowly. "Oh, has Tyler never told you?" I looked at her, confused. I genuinely didn't know what she was about to say. She turned back to Chelsea, her voice pleasant but sharp. 2 months ago, Tyler's firm was brought in to audit and rebuild a set of back-end compliance systems. There were some issues flagged with overlapping financial records and late disclosures. The firm was ready to terminate multiple execs for breach of contract. One of them was Mark. My stomach flipped. She wasn't wrong. I hadn't told her, but she must have figured it out. I don't talk about work much. I sign NDAs regularly. But the week she was referring to, yeah, I remember it now. I was pulled into a review team at the last minute to help track server-side discrepancies. I didn't know the names of the people involved at the time, just client numbers and data trails. Later, my manager quietly told me one of the senior execs had been saved by an employee flagging a fix early, an employee who turned out to be me. It never even occurred to me that the exec in question was my uncle. Lila continued, still calm. The only reason he wasn't terminated is because Tyler flagged an issue in the logs before it went up the chain. He never even took credit for it. He just did his job. The room had gone pale. Uncle Mark stared at me, then at Lila, then back at his plate like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. Chelsea, meanwhile, looked like someone had slapped her with her own credit score. I felt hot, not embarrassed, just seen. Like for the first time in a long time, someone had put me at the center of the room and said, "He matters." But if you think that was the breaking point, it wasn't. That was just the spark. The real damage came after dessert. You see, families like mine don't do confrontation. They do smothered tension. They do silent judgments and behind-the-back whispers. So after Lila's quiet mic drop, the rest of the evening continued like nothing happened on the surface. But under the table, I could feel it. Cold shoulders. Glares. The way Aunt Sharon started refilling everyone's drinks except ours. The way Chelsea suddenly forgot to pass us the pie. It was like we'd flipped some invisible switch and become radioactive. When we finally left around 10 p.m., I felt this weird mix of relief and dread. I was proud of Lila. God, so proud. But I also knew my family. They don't forget slights. Especially when you embarrass the golden child. The text started the next day. "Aunt Sharon, that was incredibly inappropriate, Tyler. You embarrassed Chelsea in front of the whole family. Thanksgiving is about gratitude, not grudges. Uncle Mark, we need to talk about what Lila said. That information was confidential. I could report you for breach. Chelsea, hope you and your little watchdog are happy. You ruined the vibe for everyone. Maybe next time stay home like you usually do." I ignored the first few, but the last one got to me. The way she phrased it, like I was some stain they'd tolerated until I had the audacity to speak up. That night, I sat on the couch with Lila and said, I think I'm done pretending with them. She didn't ask what I meant. She just said, good. But walking away from your family isn't as clean as it sounds. Because life, unfortunately, kept giving them reasons to drag me back in. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my dad. We talk every couple of months, more now than we used to, but we're not especially close. Still, when he called out of the blue, I answered, hey Ty, you, hear about Chelsea's company? No, I said, frowning. Why? He sighed. Mass layoffs. Whole marketing department gone. She's devastated. Sharon's blaming your Aunt Carol for not giving her a heads up. It's a mess. I didn't say anything. I wasn't about to gloat. She's staying with Mark and Sharon now, he added. Apparently she lost her lease. Right. Her lease. The one her parents paid for. Still, I felt a twinge of sympathy. As much as Chelsea had always been awful to me, I wouldn't wish job loss on anyone. But that sympathy didn't last long. Because 2 days later, I got another text. Chelsea, I know we've had our differences, but I need a favor. Can we talk? Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near her parents' house. She looked different, tired, makeup smudged, hair pulled back in a bun instead of her usual designer waves. For a moment, I almost forgot how cruel she'd been. Until she opened her mouth. I need a reference. I blinked. For what? A job. Anywhere. Something tech adjacent. I thought maybe you could get me into your company. You know. Put in a word. I stared at her. You called me pathetic 2 weeks ago. That was a joke, she said quickly. You know how Thanksgiving is. People say things. You embarrassed me too, remember? Can't we just move past it? I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I saw not the smug, Instagram-filtered Chelsea I'd grown up hating, but the person underneath. Entitled, yes, but also desperate. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here because she thought I was still the pushover. Still the cousin who'd stay quiet while she humiliated me, then pick up the pieces when she needed something. I didn't say no. Not then. I told her I'd think about it. But that was the moment something snapped. Because later that night, as I sat scrolling through old family group texts, something I usually avoid, I found it. A screenshot, buried in a thread from months ago. Chelsea had sent it to the family group chat without realizing I was still included. It was a photo of a dating profile, mine. Lila and I had just started seeing each other at the time, and I'd still had an old account floating around. Chelsea had captioned it. Guess some people never upgrade. Aunt Sharon replied with a laughing emoji. Uncle Mark, just like his taste in hobbies. And there it was. Clear as day. They hadn't just disrespected me at dinner. They'd been mocking me for years. Behind my back. With the people I was supposed to trust. Even when I was minding my own business. Even when I was succeeding quietly, they were tearing me down like it was a group sport. That's when the betrayal finally felt real. Not just the Thanksgiving toast. Not just the silence when I needed support. But the ongoing, intentional sabotage. The way they'd never taken me seriously, not even as a human being. Just the quiet cousin. The one they could laugh at without consequence. I sat there in the dark, screen glowing, heart pounding. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. And that's when the plan started to form. Because the one thing my family never understood was that quiet doesn't mean weak. It means watching. It means waiting. And I've been doing both for a long, long time. Rock bottom doesn't always come crashing in like a scene from a movie. Sometimes, it just settles on you quietly, like fog seeping under the door, chilling everything before you even realize what's changed. That's what it felt like in the weeks after that Thanksgiving. No big breakdown. No fiery confrontation. Just this slow, creeping emptiness. It was the first time in years I completely stopped responding to the family group chat. I didn't mute it. I wanted to see everything, to understand just how little I'd mattered to them over the years. For a while, I started to think maybe I'd imagined how bad it all was. That maybe I'd exaggerated the favoritism, the mocking, the backhanded compliments. But that screenshot Chelsea sent of my dating profile, that was the nail in the coffin. They weren't just indifferent. They were cruel. And they did it together, like it was sport. I didn't tell Lila about the group chat right away. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't even know how to say it without sounding bitter or broken. And I didn't want her to see me like that. I've always been the calm one. The guy who doesn't lose his temper, who doesn't make drama. But that silence I'd carried for years, it was finally turning heavy. Too heavy. I didn't go to Christmas. That was a first. Aunt Sharon texted the day before, asking if I'd bring Lila to the annual celebration. No apology. No warmth. Just the expectation that I'd show up, smile, and pretend Chelsea hadn't tried to humiliate me in front of the entire family. I left it on read. Then I turned off my phone and took Lila to the mountains for the weekend. That trip changed something in me. There was a moment, just a quiet, simple moment, where Lila and I were sitting on this overlook, drinking bad gas station coffee and watching the snow settle on the branches. She leaned against me and said, "You're not who they say you are, you know." I looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "They treat you like you're forgettable, like you're the one who didn't make it. But the truth is, they just don't understand you. And people tear down what they don't understand." I didn't respond right away. I just let the words sit there. Heavy. True. And then something in me clicked. She was right. I'd spent years letting other people's narratives define me. The quiet cousin. The weird tech guy. The one who didn't get married young, didn't post family photos, didn't buy into the game they were all playing. But the truth is, I had made it. I just did it on my own terms. I wasn't rich, but I was stable. I wasn't loud, but I was respected in my field. I didn't chase validation, but I had something better, freedom. And somehow, in all the noise of trying to belong, I'd forgotten that. When we got back from the trip, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my mom. We'd never been super close after the divorce. She moved out of state and started a new family. But she always tried to stay in touch, even when I pushed her away. This time, though, I called her first. We talked for 2 hours. About everything. About how I'd felt invisible growing up. About how I'd always wondered if I was the problem, or if the family was just that broken. She was quiet for a long time after I said it. Then she said, "You were never the problem, Tyler. You were just too different for them to understand." And that scared them. That conversation healed something I didn't even know was still open. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work, not as an escape, but as a way to build. I started pitching new infrastructure ideas to the company's leadership, redesigning parts of our backend that had been duct-taped together for years. My boss noticed. I got invited to meetings I was never part of before. By February, I'd been offered a lead position, my first real leadership role. Quietly, with no announcements, no celebrations, I accepted. I didn't post about it. Didn't email the family. Didn't say a word. And that silence? It felt good. Not out of spite. Out of peace. That same month, Lila and I moved in together. A modest 2-bedroom place with light that poured in through the windows and a little balcony where we drank tea in the mornings. She'd bring home case notes from work. I'd tell her about weird bugs I found in legacy code. And somehow, we made it work. She was my calm in a world that had never quite made space for me. And slowly, I started to reconnect with people who did value me. My college friend Noah, who I hadn't seen since graduation, reached out after I commented on a post about an old coding project we built. We ended up grabbing lunch. That turned into game nights. Then I met his partner, his friends. People who didn't ask, "What have you achieved this year?" but "How are you really?" That spring, I took on a freelance side project. A local nonprofit needed help building a secure donation platform. It wasn't flashy work, but it mattered. They couldn't pay much, but they insisted on sending me a handwritten card after it was done. Said it was the first time their platform hadn't crashed during a campaign. I framed that card, not for pride, but to remind myself what real value looks like. Of course, the family didn't disappear. Aunt Sharon kept sending occasional messages, usually passive-aggressive. "We missed you at Easter." Chelsea brought her new boyfriend. He works in finance. Uncle Mark once called me, left a voicemail saying he was willing to move on if I was. Whatever that meant. And Chelsea? Well, she got another job. Eventually. Some startup trying to do branded wellness retreats or something equally vague. I didn't respond when she sent me a LinkedIn request. Didn't respond when she texted. No hard feelings, either. But despite the silence, I could feel something shifting. Not in them. In me. Because I wasn't avoiding them out of fear anymore. I was choosing myself. Every day. Choosing peace. Choosing people who didn't measure worth by titles or social media clout. People who saw me, not just the absence of someone louder or flashier. It was around late summer when I heard the rumor. Apparently, Uncle Mark was strongly encouraged to retire early. The company had merged with a new tech firm. Compliance became a top priority. And well, let's just say skeletons don't stay buried long when new management comes in. The same audit logs I'd flagged last year? Yeah, Turns out they opened a bigger can of worms than anyone expected. But I wasn't the one who leaked it. I hadn't even touched that case since the initial review. Still, it happened. Karma? Maybe. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Lila. Because by then, I'd already started working on something bigger. Something personal. Something mine. It started as a quiet idea, a mentorship program for young developers who didn't fit the traditional mold. Kids like I'd been. Quiet. Overlooked. Brilliant, but unsure of their value. I didn't want them to grow up thinking they had to get loud to be heard. So I built something for them. Slowly. Carefully. Quietly. And it started to grow. 1 student. Then 4. Then 10. We met virtually every Saturday. Talked code. Talked life. Talked about how to survive in a world that praises volume over value. One kid, Isaac, 16, told me I was the first adult who ever treated him like he wasn't broken. That stuck with me. Because once upon a time, I'd needed someone like that too. By fall, I was the happiest I'd ever been. Not rich. Not famous. But fulfilled. And that's when I got the email. From Chelsea. No subject line. Just 1 sentence. I know what you did. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Because this wasn't about Thanksgiving anymore. This wasn't about a family toast or a ruined dinner. This was about something else. Something deeper. And suddenly, I realized. She didn't mean the audit. She meant something else entirely. Something I hadn't even told Lila. Yet. I must have read that email a dozen times. I know what you did. That was it. No greeting. No name. No punctuation. Just 6 words in the subject line and nothing in the body. Like a loaded gun with no instructions. I stared at it, unsure whether to laugh, delete it, or brace for impact. It had been months since Chelsea had even tried to reach out. I'd thought, hoped, she'd moved on. Found a new life to Photoshop into perfection. But apparently, I'd underestimated her capacity to hold a grudge. At first, I wondered if she was bluffing. That email could have been about anything. Maybe she was still bitter over Thanksgiving. Maybe she finally realized I'd ignored all her follow-up texts and LinkedIn requests. Or maybe, just maybe, she was throwing bait, seeing if I'd panic, react, reveal something. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she wasn't bluffing. Because there was something she could be referring to. Something I hadn't told anyone. Not Lila, not my coworkers, not even my therapist. And it started with a file. Months earlier, back when I was still deep in the back-end overhaul at my company, I'd come across a duplicate ID buried in an old access log. It wasn't anything crazy at first. Just 2 nearly identical user profiles created a few seconds apart. That sort of thing happens during onboarding sometimes. Some intern clicks the wrong button, or the HR software hiccups during integration. But when I traced the accounts, something didn't add up. One account was linked to a full-time employee. The other, a contractor. Same name, same credentials, different pay rates. One listed Chelsea's father, Uncle Mark, as the approving manager. The other had no manager attached at all. That alone wouldn't be damning. But then I found the invoice trail. The contractor had been receiving bi-weekly payments for nearly a year. Not much, just under the radar. Enough to blend into the noise of corporate expenditures. But the kicker? The contractor's login credentials had never been used. Not once. Not to clock in. Not to submit work. It was a ghost. I flagged it. Quietly. I submitted a report to internal audit, as protocol required. I never named names. Just followed the chain of command and kept my head down. A month later, the project was resolved, and I was moved to a different team. Nobody ever mentioned it again. Until now. Until her. Which meant one thing. Someone on the inside had told Chelsea. And if she knew that I was the one who'd started the audit that led to her father's early retirement, then I had to assume she also knew about the ghost account. Or at least suspected I knew more than I let on. That night, I told Lila everything. We sat on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, city lights glittering beneath us like a sea of secrets. I told her about the log, the ghost account, the invoice trail. How I tried to forget about it. How I'd let it go once I'd filed the report. She listened without interrupting, her hand resting on my knee, thumb brushing back and forth. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "So what do you want to do now?" I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't sure. At first, I wanted to ignore it. Pretend it was noise. Let it fade like every other tantrum Chelsea had thrown. But this felt different. There was venom in that email. She wasn't just angry. She was threatening something. And if she was willing to dig that deep, to go scorched earth over an old family embarrassment, then I had to be ready for whatever she was planning. So I started digging too. Not for revenge. Not yet. Just for clarity. Because something inside me needed to know the whole truth before I decided what came next. The first thing I did was pull the archived logs from the original project. Most of them were restricted now, but I still had enough admin clearance to trace the metadata. I wasn't trying to crack open a scandal. I just wanted to know if Mark had created the ghost account himself, or if someone else had done it for him. That's when I found it. The IP address used to create the duplicate user? It wasn't from the office. It was from Chelsea's condo, which meant one of two things. Either Chelsea had created the dummy account herself, or she'd logged in as her father, under his credentials, and set the whole thing up as a side hustle. And suddenly, everything snapped into place. Her vague marketing job. The brand consulting gig she always bragged about but never explained. The fact that she'd always lived beyond her means, even when the company was supposedly cutting back. This wasn't just nepotism. This was fraud. And I'd found it. Twice. Without even knowing it. I sat there staring at the screen, adrenaline flooding my veins. This was big. Too big. Not just a family scandal. Not just office gossip. If I went public with this, it would be career-ending for both her and her father. But the question wasn't could I? It was should I? That night, I started planning. Not a legal case. Not a whistleblower press release. But something more precise. More surgical. Because if I'd learned anything over the last year, it was that people like Chelsea don't learn from being exposed. They learn from consequences. Real ones. Ones they can't twist into victimhood. So I made a list. Not of targets. Of patterns. Every instance I could remember where she'd exploited someone's kindness. Borrowed money and forgot to pay it back. Used connections to skip interviews. Took credit for someone else's ideas in group projects. Slept her way into favors and then ghosted the guy once she got what she needed. All of it. Not to gossip. Not to judge. But to understand her playbook. Because if I was going to stop her, I had to think like her. Over the next 2 weeks, I reached out to a few old contacts. People from college, mutual friends, even one of her ex-co-workers who had once messaged me years ago to say, "Dude, how are you even related to her?" Turned out, Chelsea had a trail of messes she'd left behind. One guy told me she used his name as a fake reference, listing him as a team lead, even though he was actually just an intern at the time. Another said she'd used a fake offer letter from a competitor to leverage a raise at her last job. And then there was Olivia, Chelsea's old roommate. We'd met once, years ago, when I helped Chelsea move into her first apartment. Olivia was sweet, shy, kept to herself. But when I reached out, she responded almost instantly. I've been waiting for someone to ask. She told me everything. About how Chelsea used her identity to sign up for an Amex and defaulted on the payments. How she'd forged Olivia's signature on a utilities account. How she'd stolen her cat. Her cat. I was floored. This wasn't immaturity. This was a pattern of intentional, targeted manipulation. And it was all tied together by one belief. Chelsea thought no one would ever hold her accountable. Because no one ever had. Until now. That's when I made the second list. Of allies. People who were ready to talk. People who'd been burned, humiliated, discarded. I didn't have to beg. Most of them were eager. Some were scared, understandably. Chelsea had a knack for social manipulation. She knew how to turn a room against someone before they even walked in. But a few were ready to help. Especially Olivia. She sent me copies of old utility bills with her forged signature. Photos of the cat, before and after. A screen recording of Chelsea admitting, jokingly, that stealing a cat isn't theft if they like you more. I organized everything into folders. Chronological. Clean. No emotion. Just facts. And while I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it yet, I knew this. If Chelsea wanted to play games, I was going to change the rules. Lila knew I was working on something. She didn't ask. She just supported me. Cooked when I forgot to eat. Rubbed my shoulders when I sat hunched over the laptop at 1 a.m., eyes red from combing through PDFs. "You don't have to destroy her," she said one night, gently. "I'm not," I said. "I just want her to finally feel what it's like to be powerless." Because for years, Chelsea had floated through life with a safety net made of lies, privilege, and a family that never said no. And now that net was gone. Her father couldn't shield her. Her mother's social circle was shrinking fast. And her reputation? It was starting to crumble. All I had to do was give it a little push. And that opportunity came sooner than I expected. Because a week later, I got an email from a name I hadn't heard in years. Lindsay Tran, a recruiter. She used to work at the same tech firm where I interned after college. Her email was short, polite, and curious. Hey Tyler, not sure if this is still your email, but I've got a strange question. We just received a reference check request for a Chelsea W, who claims to have worked under you at Everwell Tech. She listed you as her supervisor. Just wanted to confirm. Is that accurate? I stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across my face. So that was the game. Chelsea was trying to use me as a reference. After everything. After the toast, the texts, the silence, the threats. She still thought I'd cover for her. Still thought I was the same quiet cousin who didn't speak up, didn't make waves. She had no idea who she was dealing with now. And suddenly, I knew exactly what to do next. Lindsay's email sat in my inbox like a loaded question. I didn't reply right away. I reread it a dozen times, weighing every possible angle. I wanted to be precise, smart, clean. This wasn't about blowing things up. It was about clarity, about making sure Chelsea never walked into another opportunity thinking the world still owed her applause for showing up. When I finally typed my reply, I kept it short, professional. No emotion, no backstory. Hi Lindsay. Thanks for reaching out. I can confirm that Chelsea W. did not work under me at Everwell Tech. In fact, to my knowledge, she has never been employed here in any capacity. Hope that helps. Best, Tyler M. I hit send. Then I sat back and let gravity do the rest. A few days passed. Then a week. I didn't hear anything from Chelsea. Not a text. Not a call. No vague threats or passive-aggressive one-liners. Just silence. It was the kind of silence that hummed, like the stillness right before a storm hits. But I didn't brace for it. I welcomed it, because I already knew what was coming. 2 weeks later, Olivia messaged me. She's spiraling. I think she lost the job offer. She posted a story about fake people ruining her life. I think it's about you. I checked her page out of curiosity. Chelsea's Instagram used to be a curated gallery of filtered vacations, overpriced brunches, and inspirational quotes she definitely didn't live by. Now, it was chaos. A black background with white text in Comic Sans. Funny how some people can't stand to see you win. But don't worry, I always bounce back. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so her. She still thought she was the hero of the story. Still thought life was just a montage waiting for her comeback scene. She had no idea the credits were already rolling. The job she lost wasn't just any job. It was a PR role at a tech firm with ties to a major compliance group. They'd reached out to Lindsay for a final check before onboarding. The position would have given Chelsea access to internal data, passwords, billing structures, things no one with a history of manipulation and fraud should ever be near. That reference check wasn't a formality. It was the only thing between her and another easy paycheck. And I pulled the plug, not out of spite, out of duty. I let Olivia know, told her I'd confirmed the truth, nothing more. She responded with 3 words. She had it coming. Over the next few weeks, the fallout deepened. I don't know the exact chain of events, but the pieces began to surface in the usual ways. Family whispers, social media silence, sudden, uncomfortable absences from group chats. It started when Aunt Sharon emailed me, something she hadn't done since I skipped Christmas. The subject line was simply, "Let's talk." I didn't respond. 2 days later, she called. I ignored it. Then came the voicemail. "Tyler, we need to clear the air. I think things got out of hand. Chelsea's going through a rough time. She made some mistakes, nothing serious, just misunderstandings. I think it would mean a lot if you reached out. For the sake of family. For the sake of family." That was rich. Where was that energy when they laughed at me across the Thanksgiving table? Where was it when I sat there humiliated, while they clinked glasses and celebrated Chelsea's latest lie? No. I'd spent my entire life swallowing my pride to keep the family peace. I wasn't swallowing anything anymore. Uncle Mark was next. He called during a work meeting. I let it go to voicemail. This one wasn't sweet. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think what you did makes you better than us? You're still the same weird, lonely kid who couldn't catch a football. And guess what? Nothing you do will change the fact that you'll always be a footnote in this family." That message? I saved it, because it reminded me of every Thanksgiving where I sat at the kids' table even though I was 25. Every holiday where I brought thoughtful gifts and left with nothing but a plastic Tupperware of pity pie. Every time I'd been told, directly or indirectly, that I didn't belong. That voicemail wasn't an insult. It was validation. And still, I said nothing. Because by then, I didn't need to explain myself. The revenge was already working. Not through fireworks or scandal, but through the quiet unraveling of a story Chelsea had spent her entire life building. A story where she was the center of the universe, untouchable, unstoppable, adored. But when the applause fades, when the lights dim, you're left with who you really are. And Chelsea? She had nothing left but mirrors. Cracked ones, reflecting a version of herself even she couldn't recognize. The rest of the family splintered slowly. I stopped receiving invites to birthday parties. The group chat dried up. Aunt Carol texted me once to say she was sorry for how I'd been treated. I appreciated it, but I didn't write back. I wasn't angry. I just didn't care anymore. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around again, I wasn't even on the invite list, which suited me just fine. Lila and I hosted our own dinner that year. Just us, a few friends, and Isaac, the 16-year-old coder I'd been mentoring. He brought his mom, who cried when she saw her son teaching Lila how to debug her tablet. I carved the turkey myself. There were no toasts, no passive jabs, no fake smiles, just warmth, just peace. And just when I thought the whole saga was finally behind me, something unexpected happened. Chelsea showed up, not at my door, but in my inbox. An email, long rambling, typo-filled, sent at 2:41 a.m. She blamed me for everything, of course. Said I sabotaged her life, her career, her mental health. Claimed she knew I'd always been jealous, that Lila manipulated me, that I'd gaslit the family into turning against her. But buried in all the noise was one line that stuck with me. I don't know who I am without them choosing me. And there it was. The truth. The part of her she never let anyone see. She didn't need success. She needed validation. She didn't want to be good. She just wanted to be told she was. And when that stopped happening, she had nothing left to stand on. I never replied. I didn't need to. She wasn't writing to me. She was writing to the version of me who still needed her approval. But that guy? He was gone. Burned away in the fires of one too many family dinners. And in his place stood someone she couldn't even recognize. Months passed. Life moved forward. Isaac graduated the mentorship program and got a paid internship with one of my old college buddies. He called me last week just to say, "You believed in me before I believed in myself." Lila and I got engaged in the spring. We're planning a small wedding. No family politics. No long guest list. Just the people who chose us back. And me? I'm good. I've learned that the best revenge isn't chaos or destruction. It's clarity. It's standing so firmly in your own worth that the people who once towered over you start to feel small in comparison. Not because you shrank them, but because you outgrew them. Completely. The last I heard, Chelsea was living with a roommate she barely tolerates, working freelance jobs she lies about on LinkedIn, still clinging to the fantasy that a comeback is just around the corner. But me? I don't need a comeback. I didn't fall. I just stopped showing up to a rigged game. And I never looked back. Because the day they laughed at me around that table was the day I stopped waiting for their applause.